Hello and welcome. I'm Fahd Husain. A lot is happening today. The latest is that the Supreme Leader of Iran has said that Iran will not allow enriched uranium to leave its borders. Now, Reuters is reporting this, and this comes at a time when Pakistan's Interior Minister Mohsin Naqvi is in Tehran, and there are hopes that perhaps the differences between Iran and the United States may be narrowing. But again, if we look back at the diplomatic efforts of the past couple of weeks, it is very hard to say when things are actually coming together. There is heartening news, and yet there are then twists and turns. So based on this latest news that is coming out of Reuters, based on the news that is coming out of Reuters, we have to now analyze if Iran is indeed hardening its position, or is this part of the final negotiations that are taking place? These are important questions because the future of what happens, the outcome that we are all looking forward to, it all depends on whether at this very crucial and sensitive juncture, Iran and the US suddenly become a little bit more inflexible, or whether they're open to moving forward and finding some common ground. To discuss these extremely important developments, I am joined by Mr. Trita Parsi. He's the Executive Vice Chairman, Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft, also one of the most well-followed and respected commentators on this present conflict. Mr. Parsi, welcome to our show once again.
Thank you so much for having me and for your kind introduction.
So now we have the statement coming from Iran's Supreme Leader. As I said, this may complicate matters. Does it actually?
It all depends. I think, first of all, we have to be a bit careful. There's been a lot of erroneous reporting. And on this specific issue, which is, of course, of tremendous importance, it's not entirely clear to me, A, whether it has actually happened in this manner, and whether the meaning of it was exactly this way. My own conversations have left me with the impression that both sides are actually becoming more flexible on this issue, and that the position that the Iranians are completely rejecting is not shipping out the LEU or the ETU, but rather shipping it out to the United States. But if it is shipped out to another country, mutually acceptable country, I've detected a greater willingness on the Iranian side to discuss and entertain solutions of that kind, depending on what the US puts on the table. Because the Iranians are going to ask for something significant in return at the end of the day. The principle that was established in the JCPOA, the deal that Obama negotiated, is still valid here, which is that when one side asks of a measure from the other side that is irreversible, it has to put something irreversible on the table in return. If the matter is reversible, then what you need to offer in return can also just be reversible. But measures like this, in which it would be shipped out and technically, essentially is irreversible, will require irreversible measures from the American side as well. So again, going back to what I said earlier on, my own understanding is that Iran is rejecting shipping it out to the United States. But shipping it out to a third acceptable country is something that they're willing to entertain, depending on what is put on the table.
So, which essentially means that what we are hearing right now is that there is work being done for the two sides to agree on one or two basic foundational points, call an end to the war, and then negotiate the more difficult terms. Is that also something that you are also hearing?
Yes, this appears to be the process that will be established, but I do think that there already is significant movement on the substantive issues before this 30-day process begins. So they're not starting from a position of being very far away from each other. Now, it could be that as part of that second negotiation, this statement is issued by the new Supreme Leader of Iran as part of an opening bid in the new negotiations. It could also be that this is not entirely accurately reported, or that this statement is somewhat vague deliberately, that gives the impression of a very tough position, but behind the scenes, there is actually greater flexibility. What would be a mistake in my view, and I'm not favoring the American position or the Iranian position on this specific variable, but what is very clear, and it should be very clear to both sides, is that if they let these talks collapse over this one variable, which frankly is not that important substantively, they are then risking a tremendously negative situation for both of them. And this is, so when you are in these negotiations and sometimes you get stuck on one variable, you have to have the ability to take a step back and see the larger picture. And if both sides see the larger picture, I hope they come to a conclusion that they both need to be flexible on this issue, because it is not worth sacrificing the entire deal over.
Is this the closest that the two sides have come to some sort of an agreement, you think?
At least since the negotiations in Geneva, this does appear to be the closest that they're at. But it doesn't mean that they're there yet. You know, the last 2% of the negotiations can at times, or oftentimes, be the most difficult.
And if they've come so close, and that's saying a lot when you say that, you know, this is the closest they've come since February, where do you think they've shown flexibility? Where has Iran stepped back and where has the US stepped back?
Well, for instance, on the American side, the US side is willing to put far more sanctions relief on the table, if not all of it, including primary sanctions relief. The JCPOA did not entail any sanctions relief that was primary, meaning lifting sanctions on American companies. It was all waiving, not even lifting, secondary sanctions, which meant that the US allowed Pakistan or India or China or Europe or Russia to get into the Iranian market, but American companies, with one exception, were not. Primary sanctions relief is much more important than secondary sanctions relief, because ultimately, if primary sanctions relief is put on the table, is offered, is lifted, then that hollows out the secondary sanctions in and of itself. It's a much smarter way of going about it. So from the American side, Trump has shown that he is not as committed or attached to the sanctions as previous administrations were. Secondly, on the Iranian side, the fact that they are now entertaining, they won't call it a moratorium, but they're entertaining a scenario in which they will not be enriching uranium for several years, perhaps all the way up to 12 years. This is an astonishing flexibility on the Iranian side that I hope the American side fully appreciates. And if I could just take 1 second and explain the background of this, why this is so important. In 2003, the Europeans, the E3, negotiated with Iran and succeeded in getting the Iranians to agree to voluntarily suspend enrichment. The suspension was tied to the continuation of the negotiations for a final agreement. But once Iran had suspended the enrichment, the Europeans had already gotten everything they wanted. So they had no urgency of getting to a final agreement. So they started to slow walk the negotiations. After a year and a half, the Iranians understood that this had become a trap. Whether it was intended as a trap or not is a different story, but it had become a trap. And in August 2005, 2 years later, they announced that they will start enrichment again. By January of 2006, they did so. By February 2006, they were referred to the Security Council and UN sanctions started to be imposed on Iran. The cost of restarting enrichment was much higher than the cost of just continuing the enrichment from the Iranian standpoint. And ever since, they have been completely opposed to any type of a moratorium or voluntarily suspension. But now they may be agreeing to up to 10, 12 years of that. And that is a significant point of flexibility on the Iranian side.
And what is the cause of this astonishing flexibility, you think?
I think part of the reason is that they've also come to understand that, yes, they have been able to repel the United States and Israel. In some ways, they have scored a strategic victory in this war. The regime is still there. Iran's influence in the region is arguably greater because of its control of the Strait of Hormuz. But none of this matters if there's going to be constant warfare. It's as if you've gone into a casino, you managed to get a lot of chips, but the chips are not valuable in and of themselves. You have to cash them in for the chips to be valuable. And now the Iranians need to cash in the chips that they have gotten through a negotiation that established a new order in which they will get essentially cement some of these new benefits that they have managed to achieve through the negotiations. Otherwise, they're just going to be in a state of endless warfare. And ultimately, that's not going to, in any way, shape, or form, be good for them. And they may lose almost everything that they believe that they have gained in this war.
What they've gained the most is the leverage over the Strait of Hormuz. So do you think they'll be ready to let that one go?
No, I think there's going to end up being some sort of arrangement in which there will be a mechanism. The question is how many countries will be part of the mechanism. Meaning that the American side does not want to see a mechanism that is only Iran and one other GCC country. They want to see a mechanism that is regionalized and as a result is not entirely held in the Iranian hands. And again, this is something that, before the Iranians did not have. Is it valuable? Yes, but it's valuable if you can exchange it for something. If you don't exchange it for something, you don't get sanctions relief. Yes, you control the straits. But what good is that ultimately? This is the important thing that needs to be understood in all of these different types of negotiations. There's a value in leverage, but only to the point that you are willing to give up that leverage to get something more permanent. But just controlling the straits, yes, it pressures everyone else. But is that an acceptable long-term state to be in? What good does that do to Iran? If it can't translate this into sanctions relief, into regional rehabilitation, political rehabilitation. Now they have leverage. It would be very foolish for them not to use that leverage to get a deal. They will be repeating the mistake that the United States committed for more than 10, 15 years. The United States was so happy that he had leverage over Iran because of the sanctions. But he wasn't willing to lift the sanctions to get a deal. Because some of the people who had pushed for these sanctions, particularly those on the pro-Israeli side, they were not looking at the sanctions as leverage. They were looking at the sanctions as permanent punishment. Not something that actually should be exchanged in a deal, but something that should permanently keep the Iranians weak. Now the Iranians have to be careful not to repeat that mistake. Mistake leverage for permanent benefit.
Which means that when it comes to making the final call about doing a deal, what we saw last time around, where both sides got stuck on no, you open the Strait of Hormuz first, no, you lift the naval blockade first. This thing, do you think this time around, there'll be a different approach?
I certainly hope so. And last time it seems like the Iranians were willing to take the first step. They issued the tweet saying that they're going to open the strait. The United States was supposed to reciprocate. But Trump himself admitted in the White House that all of his advisors advised him to reciprocate, lift the blockade of the blockade. Instead, he chose to keep it. And I think that further crushed whatever little trust existed. It made it more difficult to get a deal later on, and it did not benefit the United States in any way, shape, or form. We're talking about gas prices and oil prices that are higher now during the ceasefire than they were during the war, mainly because of the blockade of the blockade. We're talking about the 10-year yield and the 30-year yield that is reaching unprecedented levels. The 30-year yield in the United States is now reaching the same level it had in 2007, 5.18%. And you all remember what happened in 2007.
Exactly. So basically, both sides came close to some sort of an agreement a couple of weeks back, then things went south. And then since then, we almost went back to war. What has changed in the last 10 days, 2 weeks, which has kind of convinced both sides to give their best to find an agreement? A couple of important things that have happened, which I'll refer to you. The China visit of President Trump, and then Pakistan's refusal to let go of this back channel, even when there was so much pressure on Pakistan also. And we were getting criticism from people like, Senator Lindsey Graham, and from even from the Iranian side. I mean, Indian criticism is always there, but we discount that because that's like a default criticism. But, there was a point, Mr. Parsi, where even here in Pakistan, a lot of people are saying, did we do wrong? Because we may end up getting the blame for everything. So there were doubts also. But we persevered. Things went on quietly. So essentially what I'm trying to ask you is, what changed in the last 10 days or 2 weeks that has brought these two sides to a stage where you're saying that it's the closest since February?
So I think it's first important to recognize that the Trump administration is in and of itself split. And there are elements there who favor a renewed military campaign. You certainly have very vocal voices in Lindsey Graham and Ted Cruz, in the Israelis who are pushing for this. They're very much against the deal. They're very much against those who are stepping up to negotiate, whether that is Pakistan, Oman, or Qatar. They have all, one way or another, been attacked by the Israelis, who are trying to make it as costly as possible for any country to try to come in and mediate a peace here. But I think in the administration, ultimately, Trump, however, we don't know the details, but ultimately decided to continue the negotiations. The extent to which he really was close to ordering strikes, I'm not entirely convinced of.
Okay.
It's part of a narrative that is helpful to him because he wants to give the impression that he's in control, that he's dictating the outcomes. But if it was that simple, that he's in control and he was dictating the outcomes, this issue would have been over with a long time ago. It is precisely because neither side is in full control that we are more than 60, 70 days into this at this point. But I think one of the things, in addition to what you mentioned, that has happened, I think the China visit is very important. That the U.S. side, I don't think, got anything of value or significant value from the Chinese. There's a statement that the Chinese promised not to sell weapons to Iran, but we've only seen that statement come from Trump, not from the Chinese. Secondly, when the Chinese say that they would like to see the strait to be open, that's a very non-committal or it's a statement that lacks meaning, essentially. Because, yes, of course they would like to see the strait open, but who do they blame for it? They're currently getting their ships out. Their problem is if the United States at this point were to block Chinese ships going out through the blockade, not just what the Iranians are doing, particularly since right before the visit, the Iranians made a deal with the Chinese and allowed the Chinese ships to be able to pass through. We don't know the details if the Chinese paid or not. The other thing then that has happened, which I think is really important, is the economic situation in the United States. And again, looking at oil prices and then looking at the 10-year yield in particular. Because once it reaches certain levels, it means that companies stop lending to each other. The entire credit market collapses, and that will bring about devastating economic situations. And if there's anything Trump is very, very sensitive to, it's matters of this kind.
So the pressure on him and from the economic side, from the political side, obviously played a key role. Also, from the Iranian side, I'll refer you to a picture that has come out. Pakistan's interior minister is in Tehran again, second time in the last couple of days, and he met the commander of the IRGC. How important is that the fact that not only are they meeting, but that meeting is being publicized?
I think it's crucial that there is a meeting in the first place, because ultimately what this all means is that there's a recognition the IRGC is more or less running the country, and there cannot be a deal that goes against what the majority of the IRGC commanders ultimately want. And that is not in and of itself new. It was always the case to a certain extent. But the IRGC's position obviously has strengthened dramatically as a result of this war, which was highly predictable. War does not favor the doves, it favors the military then. And now the United States is going to have to deal with this issue, and it's the fact that the mediators can meet directly with the IRGC is also something that is very helpful, so that there's not layers of layers between the mediators and some of the key decision makers.
And I think that means that most stakeholders are now hopefully coming on board. Also linked to the last couple of weeks that I was mentioning, another very important thing, at least an important information that came out, and I'd like your reaction to it. The story by the New York Times about the fact that Mr. Ahmadinejad, the former president of Iran, was supposed to be the person who American and Israelis wanted to install as the leader of Iran. What do you make of that story?
It's, again, I've reached a point in which I'm very skeptical about almost anything that is reported these days. And this one, I cannot in any way, shape, or form confirm myself whether it's true or not. But let's presume that it's true. If it is true, then I think Joe Kent's analysis is spot on, which is that the Israelis knew very well that Ahmadinejad had no ability to be able to get the security establishment to come to his side. He has lost that base of support. He didn't have much of a base of support of his own to begin with. But so the reason they were pushing him was only to convince Trump to go to war, because Trump was looking for someone to be able to control the country that came from the inside. He looked at Reza Pahlavi, he was not impressed. He wanted someone from the inside. And the Israelis were then suggesting Ahmadinejad, whose only credential was that he was from the inside. Now, the piece also argues that he had essentially been cultivated by the Israelis for some time, which would be very, very interesting if that is the case. He clearly had made trips to countries that have very, very close intelligence relations with Israel. And it does not make a lot of sense, frankly, for Ahmadinejad to show up in Guatemala, for instance. So there's a plausibility to this story, or at least some elements of this story. But it also puts a tremendous amount of embarrassment at the feet of the former crown prince of Iran, Reza Pahlavi, who made himself a complete stooge of the Israelis, sold himself entirely to the Israelis in the hope that the Israelis would convince Trump to put him in power. He had no other chance to get to power but from someone installing him from the outside. And unbeknownst to him, the Israelis actually were pushing for Ahmadinejad, of all people, instead of Pahlavi himself.
So finally, if this deal does work out, and we're all keeping our fingers crossed, what happens to Israel then?
This will be devastating for Israel. Israel has been against every type of a deal between the United States and Iran, and every deal that contains sanctions relief they will oppose, and there is no deal between the US and Iran on this issue that will not contain sanctions relief. The question, though, is under this current circumstance in which elections are going to take place soon in Israel, Trump is very popular in Israel. Netanyahu has not succeeded in translating the popularity of the war, or the support for the war, into a political win for him. Can he afford a public fight with Trump over this issue? And if you notice, Trump himself has been sending signals very clearly to the Israelis. When he's going out there and saying that he's very popular in Israel, that 99% of the people there support him, that he could run and become prime minister in Israel, he is telling all of the Israeli candidates and officials, if you attack me for this deal, I can end your political career. If Netanyahu goes out and attacks Trump over this, and picks a fight with him like he did with Obama, Trump can go and endorse Naftali Bennett, and that will be the end of Netanyahu's career. And end of his career will likely mean that he will start serving terms in prison. So there is a unique window of vulnerability on the Israeli side that both sides, both Iran and the United States, should take advantage of. And the Iranians themselves in particular should recognize that it would be smarter for them to strike a deal during this window of vulnerability rather than to wait this out for too long and then miss it.
Absolutely. That's a very important point. We are at a very, very crucial stage, and as I was saying earlier, that I think every single person in the world will be praying hard that this time around the deal doesn't collapse, the talks don't collapse, and we all succeed, and Pakistan's efforts succeed, and everybody else who's involved in this process, they help out and things work out the way that we all want them to. Mr. Trita Parsi, it's such a pleasure speaking with you, listening to your analysis.
Thank you so much.
It's always, we all learn from it, and thank you for your time once again.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
We will take a short break here. When we come back, we'll talk about Pakistan's role. It has been the most important diplomatic role that Pakistan has played for a very long time. We are not at the finishing line as yet, but we are close to it. What would it mean for Pakistan? We'll talk after this break. So things are moving very fast, and it appears that that there could be some important developments coming out of Tehran. A lot of news is filtering out through various sources, as I was mentioning earlier. But what I can say with a fair degree of confidence is that the kind of hope that we are sensing hasn't been visible for at least for quite a while actually. So, and of course, once again, the source of hope is Pakistan, Pakistani diplomacy, and our tireless efforts to somehow try and snatch peace from the jaws of war. That's what's been happening. I want to today have a discussion on how Pakistan has managed to stay so steadfast in the face of opposition, in the face of misinformation coming from all sides, and I will mention that also in today's segment. So joining me to discuss all of these developments are General retired Samre Salik. He keeps a very close eye on all of these developments. Also joining me is Ambassador Johar Salim, Pakistan's former Foreign Secretary, also the President of Institute of Regional Studies, and Mr. Kamran Yusuf, my colleague and anchor at Express 24/7. Grateful for all of you to be joining me. General Samrez, I feel that what we've been able to do, and again, we don't know where this will go. We don't know whether actually there will be some actual positive development. We don't know if Iran and the US will actually agree on a draft that we are hearing. But what we do know is that despite all odds, Pakistan has persevered, sometimes visibly, most times behind closed doors. And just when everybody seemed to have lost hope and was preparing for war, Pakistan just continued. So I think that's a role that no other country has played in a crisis like this for a fairly long time.
Fahd, thank you very much for getting me for your program. I would say all appreciation, all kudos for Pakistan's diplomacy. We know that since May 25, Pakistan, alhamdulillah, every day has gained in its stature. And with that, rising to this level, where Pakistan is playing a key role in finding a resolution to a conflict which impacts us the most. And we see that the US is trapped in a quagmire. They are not finding any solution because fighting is no more an option. Although President Trump has been talking of that, the preparations are like that. But seeing the ground realities, seeing the implications of President Trump's visit to China, President Putin's visit to China, I think that fighting is less probable. Now, in this situation, Pakistan is playing the key role. And I would say that it is, besides so many other times, particularly it is happening for the second time, that Pakistan is trying to rescue a superpower from a difficult situation. One was in 1971, once we provided an opening to the US, to China. That is in form of KKH as well as President Nixon's visit. And second, I think, is this time that the US is in a difficult situation and we are providing them a rescue, which is, I think, a matter of great honor, pride and privilege for Pakistan.
Absolutely, and we hope that what you're saying is something that other countries also recognize. I know that we are getting a lot of credit for it, but we've also been getting some criticism from the usual suspects, and we will talk about that. But Ambassador Johar Salim, same question to you. The fact that there is hope at this stage, and obviously there have been incidents where or times where we felt that things were moving in the right direction. So I don't want to jump the gun. But again, after a very long time, thanks only to Pakistan, we are at a stage where both the Americans and the Iranians are saying that there could be some major development. So as General Samir Saleh was also saying, and I fully maintain that, full credit to Pakistan for not giving up when almost everybody was ready to give up.
Yeah, that's true actually. Pakistan's remarkable diplomacy has been appreciated by everybody in the world almost, except for a few detractors that you mentioned rightly. I think the point is that it's a very challenging situation. It's not going to be easy. There could be cautious optimism, but I believe there's still very many impediments there because the point of view of the two sides is still far apart. And that is why we see such an intense diplomacy from Pakistan, because without this diplomacy, we would have seen another round of strikes. And that would have not suited anyone, not Iran, not America, and least of all the Gulf countries who took the brunt of the last war or the last military side of this conflict. So I think what Pakistan is trying to accomplish is 2 or 3 things. One, of course, being an honest facilitator and mediator. That is one. But the second thing is also trying to bring the two sides closer, because somebody needs to do that. Because if you just pass on the messages, that is not enough at this point in time. This is a make or break period. So that is the third thing which I see is, and I've been, I think, probably one of the few who's been consistently saying that within Iran, there is that sort of, tussle in terms of point of view, in terms of perspective between the hardliners and the pragmatists. And the pragmatism needs to prevail. And that is, although this is sort of, of course, it should have been ideally sorted out amongst them. But I think Pakistan is playing a role in this regard in sort of, in helping this realization dawn upon the important stakeholders there, the important actors there, that this is not the time for brinkmanship.
George Saab, I think that is why it was so important that the Interior Minister met the commander of the IRGC. Exactly what you're saying. That's what makes it so crucial, and which in some ways means that now the hardliners may also be on board.
Yeah, and it's very important that because they have to be convinced, because we know now, the world knows that that the sort of the center of gravity in terms of power in Iran has shifted a bit, and that is why the IRGC's role becomes very important.
Yeah.
And they are such an important stakeholder now that they need to be convinced, amongst others, there in Iran. And that is why, we've seen these visits, and probably like some more visits might take place. There's some more visits on the anvil. But I think it's not going to be easy, because in Iran, a narrative was sold that they have won the war, that the Strait of Hormuz is theirs to control now, and they are going to charge toll on that, and they're going to, it's going to be a constant source of income and a constant source of strategic ascendance. And at the same time, there's this feeling there that, okay, we are not going to negotiate on the nuclear period.
Yeah.
Now, if you have these things sort of, in mind, then the negotiation becomes really difficult. And that is why I think Pakistan's job has become so much the more challenging.
Exactly, and
we saw that in recent times.
And the nature of the challenge, of course, lies in the fact that our key people are going back and forth to Tehran. Kamran Yusuf, thanks for joining us. What are you hearing? Because as Ambassador George Salim was saying, that the hardliners have to be brought on board, and now that Mohsen Naqvi has met all the key people there. Are there chances that even more important people will be going to Tehran soon?
Well, it all depends how Pakistani Interior Minister Mr. Mohsen Naqvi's meetings in Tehran go. If there is a tangible progress, certainly I think you cannot rule it out, another high-level visit from Pakistan to Tehran. What is happening at the moment is that because of via Pakistan, both Iran and the United States have exchanged a certain number of proposals, but unfortunately, despite several exchanges of proposals, both sides still I think far apart when it comes to narrowing down their differences. So what is happening at the moment, because there is a lot of uncertainty as this conflict lingers on, there is no war but no peace either. So my own understanding is that Pakistan, along with other regional players, trying to come up with some kind of a stopgap arrangement, or you can call it a standby agreement, or as President Trump put it, a letter of intent may be signed by both Iran and the US. So if both sides agree, then there is a possibility that both sides may sign a piece of paper where they show their interest, that look, both sides identify their areas of concerns and interest and conditions, and then get involved in more serious negotiations, while that piece of paper, letter of intent you call it, or MOU, may provide both sides an opportunity to formally exit from the war.
And
but whether Pakistan is able
big,
to achieve that, indeed, I think, but whether Pakistan will be able to achieve that goal again is a key question, because I believe that US, in return for that kind of agreement, certainly wants Strait of Hormuz to be reopened pre-Feb 28 or pre-war status. And this is not just the US is saying, many other regional players. In fact, one very important development yesterday that took place, while the moment Pakistani Interior Minister landed in Tehran, soon after that, Saudi Foreign Minister put a statement on X, and he said that one, he thanked President Trump for accepting the request for not resorting to military strikes on Iran. Second, he wholeheartedly backed Pakistani mediation efforts, and then pointed out that the Strait of Hormuz should be restored to the pre-Feb 28 status. So my own understanding is that Pakistan has been telling Tehran that look, that all the other regional countries are not ready to accept the new protocols that you are suggesting. So if this standby agreement is being discussed at the moment, and if there is an agreement, I believe that Iran has to give a major concession on this issue of Strait of Hormuz.
That is a fairly reasonable demand, General Samrez, because from what I understand, the very fact that Iran has been able to use the closure of the Strait of Hormuz as a strategic weapon, and they've done it very effectively. In fact, that is the weapon which has really brought down American ambitions in terms of what they were wanting to achieve from Iran. So absolutely yes, they've been able to do it. But the fact that the entire world now feels that if Iran has complete monopoly over who passes or who cannot pass through the Strait of Hormuz, that would become a huge problem. So I don't want to again go beyond what has been agreed or what has not been agreed upon, but this is a real concern for everybody, and if I may add, also for Pakistan.
You have raised a very pertinent point. In my view, in the last round of war, it was bilateral issue. That was on one side US and Israel, on another side Iran. With the closure of Strait of Hormuz, it became a trilateral issue. The whole world is impacted because of the closure of Strait of Hormuz. So it was, in my view, a very smart move by Iran. And so thereby comes a compulsion that for which I say that the fighting is no more an option either for US, Iran, and even the world at large. Now, as far as closure of Hormuz is concerned, my assessment is same, that they created a leverage out of it. Although Iran also knows that it is not tenable. If they want to have a total control on Strait of Hormuz, tomorrow there can be somebody else demanding a total control on Gulf of Aden or Strait of Malacca.
Exactly.
That cannot happen, and even I would say China will not support that.
Yeah.
Having said that, they have created a beautiful leverage, which they will exploit while they sit on the negotiating table.
And we have to be then very careful, because clearly we have to balance the demands, Ambassador George Salim, we have to balance the demands of what the Americans are saying and what the Iranians are saying. And, I've been saying that our role is now gone far beyond what it was when the first round of talks was held here in Islamabad. It's much more, and I don't think it's wrong to say that when things seem to be completely falling apart, Pakistan was able to hold them together. It was because of us quietly that both Iran and the US did not plunge back into war. So I think what we've done so far is underappreciated. I know that countries acknowledge our role, but I don't think that many people realize how crucial Pakistan's role has been to make sure that wars don't start again. And now at this stage, I don't know whether we are negotiating with both sides, but we are clearly doing much more than what we were doing before that. Do you think that people, countries understand, recognize, acknowledge the painstaking work that we've done, despite earning a lot of criticism from, as I said, the usual suspects?
Well, there are 3 or 4 points here. Number one, I would say, by and large, most countries in the world very much appreciate what Pakistan has been doing. The detractors will always be detractors. So that shouldn't really concern us. But more importantly, Pakistan is not doing it for winning any accolades or, like any praise for, or sort of, any cookie points, so to speak. Pakistan is doing it because we believe it is vital for our interests as well to have peace and security in this region. And it is very important for Pakistan to ensure that, it's exactly one of the tenets of our foreign policy, which is enshrined in our constitution, relations with the Muslim countries. So we cannot allow Muslim countries to be in a state of war with each other. So, it's basically in terms of our own national interest and in terms of our foreign policy interest as well. That's number one. Secondly, in terms of what has been said about the Strait of Hormuz, I believe that Iranians, yes, they obtained a huge leverage. But that leverage has been partially or perhaps mostly neutralized by the US when they effected a blockade of Iran. US is not really directly suffering because of the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. In fact, if anything, they're gaining by it. They're selling record amounts of oil and gas at record prices. In fact, they have now become the biggest exporters of oil and gas in the world. They're not directly affected. Iran is directly affected. The Gulf countries are directly affected. China is directly affected. We are directly affected. So I think if Iran thought that this leverage, they had obtained a leverage, but if they thought that this leverage will allow them to force Americans to give major concessions on the nuclear issue, I have been saying consistently that would not happen.
But I think,
and that is exactly what the Americans have done.
Today, Ambassador George Salim, is and what Kamran was also saying, is that right now what is being reported is that there's work being done on what is being called the letter of intent, where all these difficult negotiations will not take place. They just agree on not fighting or officially ending the war. And for that, I think they'll have to agree to just 1 or 2 basic things before, and after that, they're going to start talking about the deeper, bigger, larger, more difficult, complicated issues like the nuclear and reparations, etc., etc. So, it's a smaller agenda right now.
Yeah, let me come to that. Firstly, when we were going to have the Islamabad talks, we were actually having Islamabad talks. I had said at that time that what I foresee was some sort of a framework understanding leading to further negotiations on the key points. That was the position then. That is the position now. But we have to remember one thing. When they say, they'll sign a letter of intent, I mean, if this was the case that they would have signed just a letter of intent to start negotiations, they could have done it a long time back. It's not as simple as it seems. They have to determine some broader principles within which they will negotiate. And to determine that, Iran would have to accept, for instance, that the suspension is one of those, like the 0% that enrichment freeze. It's going to be one of those broad parameters that 440 kilograms of enriched uranium is going to be. They have to have some.
They had already agreed upon this in February, if you remember. So I don't think it will be very difficult for them to go back and reaffirm what they had already agreed upon.
No, in February, you see, and that's where sort of, I think there has been some confusion as to what had been agreed. First of all, in terms of the timelines, Iran had been talking about 3 to 5 years, America 20 years, although initially they were saying indefinite, right? Secondly, in terms of the enriched uranium, Iran, even if they want to make some concessions, they talk about downblending it in
Yes,
Iran.
of course.
And Americans want it to be removed to a third country.
That is a
to
state
America.
position.
So that
John
is that.
Sahab, let me bring in Kamran also. Let me come back to you after that. Kamran, so basically, at this stage, the main problem, the obstacle, or the reason why the two sides have still not been able to come to a point where they can agree upon the bare minimum agenda to officially end the war, which is what you were mentioning. Do we have any idea what that agenda would be? Of course, one can hazard a guess that from the American side, that would be opening the Strait of Hormuz, and from the Iranian side, it would be either reparations or unfreezing of funds. I think that's the bare minimum that would be required for the war to officially come to an end.
I think a broader agenda is absolutely clear as far as the US is concerned. President Trump has repeatedly stated that they will never allow Iran to have nuclear weapons, although Iran repeatedly stated that they have absolutely no intentions to have nuclear bombs. So that is the agenda number one as far as the US is concerned. On the other hand, there is an issue of mistrust as far as Tehran is concerned. They need certain guarantees. That what are the guarantees that if there is any agreement with the US, and the US will honor that. Of course, that is the key thing. And the compensation that they are seeking, they want that they should be provided those compensations either through unfreezing of assets, or they should take fee or a toll from ships that pass through the Strait of Hormuz. So these are the broader issues. But I think the main problem at the moment right now is to first agree on something that provide both sides an off-ramp that they can officially declare that this war is over. Then they can go back to the negotiating table. This evening, it appears that Iran is hardening its stance. Reuters actually has reported that Iran's Supreme Leader Mujtaba Khamenei has ordered that the 400 kg stockpile of 60% enriched uranium will stay in Iran. So I think if this is true, that is a huge I think a decision on part of Iran, because I believe among the three key components of this Iranian nuclear issue, this probably is one of the things that can easily be dealt with, because Iran has previously shown interest that they are ready to let go that 60% enriched uranium. So imagine if they are saying no, that this will stay in Iran, that will send certainly a very wrong message to Washington. Washington will react. The other two parts, of course, are the most difficult one when it comes to the nuclear issue. Of course, one, that Iran is not ready to let go its right as far as enriching uranium for peaceful purposes, because they say that they are part of the NPT, so they should not be barred from enriching uranium for peaceful purposes. The third thing, of course, the easiest one, that Iran has stated previously as well, they are ready to say it again, that they are not seeking a nuclear weapon. But this particular aspect, the new a decree from the Iranian Supreme Leader can cast a long shadow over this fragile diplomatic process.
Absolutely. So many bridges to cross. We are at a very, very crucial, sensitive stage, and of course, everybody hopes that that Pakistan is able to deliver peace at a time where everything looks so difficult and all positions seem to be hardening. We'll take a short break here, but when we come back, a reminder of why the entire world hates Israel. After the break. Imagine if any government official anywhere else in the world had an unarmed, bound woman slammed violently to the ground and then hovered over her, laughing and cheering as his guards manhandled her. In any civilized society, that would be an automatic, instantaneous cause for dismissal. They would be fired, disgraced, and would face absolute banishment from public life. But not in Israel. In Israel, this sickening display isn't just tolerated, it is actually celebrated. It is exactly this kind of deranged, evil behavior that makes people like this Israeli National Security Minister the real ugly face of Israel. Look at the footage he proudly broadcast after Israeli military unlawfully intercepted a civilian flotilla in international waters and forcefully detained over 400 international activists. Look at the National Security Minister walking through that makeshift detention facility, a giant Israeli flag in his hand, a smug, sadistic grin plastered across his face. He is laughing straight into the camera. He is parading these doctors, journalists, grandmothers like trophies of war. He has them forced to their knees, hands zip-tied behind their backs, forehead pressed into the dirt while the Israeli national anthem blasts over loudspeakers to drown out their cries. And when that one handcuffed woman dared to shout, "Free Palestine," his guards immediately slammed her onto the floor. The minister just stood there, gloating, waving his flag, telling the camera, "They came here all full of pride like big heroes. Look at them now." He laughs. He calls it a glorious victory, and he demands that they be locked away for a long, long time. And then, right on cue, the damage control starts. The Israeli foreign minister rushes to social media to publicly chastise him. And he writes, "You knowingly caused harm to our state in this disgraceful display. You are not the face of Israel." That is an absolute lie. It's an insult to the intelligence of the entire world. For the foreign minister to say this is not the face of Israel could not be falser, because this minister is the perfect, unvarnished face of what Israel is. He represents everything that this state has become. The absolute lack of morality, the complete evaporation of basic human empathy, the utter arrogance of unchecked cruelty. Why does the minister feel so comfortable broadcasting state-sponsored degradation to the universe? Because he knows exactly who his audience is. This psychotic behavior isn't happening in a vacuum. It is happening because the Israeli public condones it. They cheer for it. They vote for it. This is a society which has become so deeply sick that they look at the starvation of innocent children in Gaza, the relentless slaughter of civilians in Lebanon, and they celebrate it. When a population looks at a video of humanitarian workers being abused and humiliated, and it reacts with applause instead of disgust, they are showing us exactly who they are. Such cruelty has become their national identity. And that is precisely why a unified global wall of disgust is finally fracturing the silence. World leaders are looking at this display and seeing a regime that represents nothing but terror. The Italian Prime Minister has called the video unacceptable and an absolute violation of human dignity, immediately summoning the Israeli ambassador to demand an apology. From Rome to Ottawa, from London to Paris, the condemnations are pouring in. Canadian Prime Minister has called the treatment abominable. The British Foreign Secretary stated she was truly appalled. And the European Council President said he was appalled by the treatment of flotilla members and demanded their immediate release. The Australian Foreign Minister also joined in, calling the images shocking and unacceptable. 10 nations have lined up to reprimand this regime because a recent global poll just confirmed what the world already knows. An overwhelming 97 to 98% of people surveyed across the globe view Israel with strong, absolute disapproval.